And I'll be frank, when you read some of the civil lawsuits, they read like a federal indictment.
We're now entering week 2 of P. Diddy dominating the news after federal raids that followed bombshell allegations in a lengthy lawsuit.
Those recordings can literally be a window into what was going on in P. Diddy's home.
But what about the other names mentioned in the court docs?
And so it's not so far afield to imagine that it wouldn't just be P. Diddy facing charges, but those around him that supported and helped him.
From his son Justin Combs to Universal Music Group, we're breaking down the other defendants listed in the civil suits against Diddy and those whose names were just mentioned.
I would assume that anybody listed in those civil complaints has hired an attorney.
But before we jump into the other defendants, let's focus on the alleged kingpin in all this, P. Diddy himself. He goes by many names: Puff, Puffy, Puff Daddy, Diddy, but in the lawsuits, this rapper, label exec, and entrepreneur is listed as his legal name, Sean Combs. Last week, 2 of Diddy's homes, one in California and one in Florida, were raided by Homeland Security as part of a federal investigation. It's important to note that Diddy has not been charged criminally, and we're not even totally sure if he was the target of those raids. We spoke to law and crime legal analyst Julie Rendelman to make sense of this one.
And it's not uncommon for them to be a lead up to the potential for criminal charges.
So what are the allegations? There are multiple suits against Diddy, brought on by plaintiffs who knew him in the 90s all the way up until now. The common theme we've seen across all the suits is sexual assault allegations, that Diddy allegedly raped, drugged, and beat people, oftentimes recording all this. We saw this in a lawsuit from Cassandra Ventura late last year. That's the singer Cassie, who dated Diddy for years. Cassie alleged all those things and more, including the allegation that Diddy blew up Kid Cudi's car when he got jealous. Cassie's lawsuit was filed under the New York Survivors Act, which gave sexual assault survivors a 1-year timeline to file suit against their alleged predators, even if the statute of limitations had run out.
So several of the lawsuits were filed within the Adult Survivors Act, and that allowed for individuals who had allegations from many, many years before to have almost a look-back window. A look-back window, I believe it's of 1 year, to enable them to file civil lawsuits for cases that normally would have been beyond the statute of limitations. And so Cassie, along with several others, took advantage of that short change in the law to enable them to file civil suits against P. Diddy.
Just 1 day after she filed a lengthy lawsuit against Diddy, Cassie settled outside of court.
The first thing I thought was, there is stuff she knows that he does not want coming out, because that is an incredibly quick settlement.
That's not the case for several others who filed suit against the rapper, namely Lil Rod, whose legal name is Rodney Jones. His nearly 100-page civil suit details extreme allegations of abuse and coercion. We know, according to the lawsuit, that Lil Rod lived with Diddy for months at a time. He produced 9 songs for Diddy's latest album, the Love Album. Lil Rod even alleges that Diddy promised him things in order to keep him quiet, like $250,000 to buy instruments, ownership of Diddy's $20 million property in Miami, and even a Grammy for Producer of the Year. On top of all this, Lil Rod says his allegations are corroborated with, quote, hundreds of hours of footage and audio recordings of Mr. Combs, his staff, and his guests engaging in some serious illegal activity because Diddy apparently required Lil Rod to record him constantly. Lil Rod also alleges he was, quote, the victim of constant, unsolicited, and unauthorized groping and touching of his anus by Mr. Combs. At times, Lil Rod says Diddy touched his private parts without consent and forced Lil Rod to watch him shower or have naked body massages. Lil Rod says Diddy, quote, attempted to groom Mr. Jones into engaging in gay sex. According to Julie Rendelman, these allegations and dozens of others in Lil Rod's lawsuit may have led up to those federal raids. And I know that there, again, are no criminal charges filed yet, but what everyone's talking about is these civil lawsuits. Is it possible that the allegations made in these multiple different lawsuits are what led up to these investigations by Homeland Security?
Absolutely, and I think we've seen this before. We saw it in the Epstein case, we saw it in the R. Kelly case, that it takes sometimes a civil lawsuit, individuals coming forward with these specific allegations. And I'll be frank, when you read some of the civil lawsuits, they read like a federal indictment, to be frank.
So you mentioned Epstein, which leads me into my next question about the civil suit, this one brought by Lil Rod. It's interesting because in the court documents, he draws a comparison to Diddy's chief of staff, her name's Christina Coram, to Ghislaine Maxwell. I mean, blatantly just laying it out like that. Would you, the way that you read it, also compare them?
Comparisons in the civil suit regarding um, P. Diddy's chief assistant to that of Ghislaine Maxwell, who we know eventually was indicted and convicted. And so it's not so far afield to imagine that it wouldn't just be P. Diddy facing charges, but those around him that supported and helped him in these, again, assuming these allegations are correct, of any of these sexual escapades that occurred that amounted to criminal activity.
All this brings us to the defendants listed in Lil Rod's lawsuit, like Chief of Staff Christina Coram. The lawsuit straight compares Coram to Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's longtime companion, who was eventually convicted on multiple federal sex crimes.
There's also a picture basically side to side of Epstein with Maxwell along with P. Diddy with KK. And so again, remember, we keep all focusing on P. Diddy and the potential for charges against P. Diddy. There are many people that are surrounding him that also could be facing potential criminal charges. It's not just P. Diddy.
According to the lawsuit, Coram, or KK as Julie called her, required all staff, from butlers to Diddy's chef and even Lil Rod, to carry around a fanny pack with drugs like cocaine, ecstasy, and marijuana gummies. The lawsuit reads, quote, "It was important to defendant Coram to have Mr. Combs' drug of choice immediately ready when he asks for it." Lil Rod also alleges Coram ordered sex workers and prostitutes for Diddy. So far, we haven't heard a statement from Coram about these allegations. But according to Lil Rod, other defendants received financial benefit in return for their assistance, support, and facilitation of Combs' sex trafficking venture. That's people like Lucian Charles Grange, the CEO of Universal Music Group, and Ethiopia Habtemariam, the former CEO of Motown Records. The lawsuit alleges these two concealed the delivery of vast sums of cash, likely millions of dollars worth. Lil Rod also alleges they failed to timely file required tax disclosures surrounding the funding of these sex trafficking parties with the federal government, because doing so would imperil its ability to profit from the sex trafficking venture. Grange's rep released a statement reading, quote, "In an offensively reckless complaint, Sir Lucian has been improperly dragged into this matter despite having no knowledge of nor any involvement in any of Mr. Combs' alleged conduct." Is it possible that they're already being investigated by the feds?
Absolutely. And keep in mind, not only could they be investigated, some of them may have already spoken to the feds, the U.S. attorney. I would assume that anybody listed in those civil complaints has hired an attorney, and that attorney has reached out to either the agents or the U.S. attorney's office, because one would expect that any of these individuals is going to want to get ahead of things. They certainly don't want to be a defendant. Maybe they want to be a witness, but certainly not a defendant.
Julie says there are steps these defendants should be taking.
Anytime an individual is a potential defendant in a federal criminal investigation, one of the options is to go in with your attorney and provide information with the hope that that information will be so important to the U.S. Attorney's Office that they will question whether or not, in fact, they're going to arrest the individual that's providing the information. There's no guarantee for that. Some people will wait and say, you know what, and not provide them any information. My guess, though, is that any individual that is listed in the complaints has gotten an attorney and is trying to figure out what is the best move forward to protect themselves.
What about the people who are listed throughout these complaints but are not defendants? Should they also be acquiring legal counsel?
So it's a great question. Look, I mean, in some of these suits, you saw Prince Harry referred to. He's certainly not someone that appears to be a potential defendant. I think he's merely being named to explain the levels of P. Diddy's ability to reach those in powerful positions. So I certainly don't think someone in his position is going to be looking to retain an attorney to protect him in regards to these federal cases. But in a sense, when you get listed in there, you are a potential witness and a potential defendant. And so everyone is going to want to protect themselves.
Prince Harry was mentioned just once in Lil Rod's lawsuit and doesn't face any allegations. But someone like Academy Award winner Cuba Gooding Jr. does. Lil Rod alleges Diddy was, quote, grooming him to pass him off to his friends. This fear became reality when Mr. Combs introduced Mr. Jones to Cuba Gooding Jr. when they were on Mr. Combs' yacht. There's actually photos of their interaction together too, which are laid out in those court documents. In the first pic, you see Diddy and Cuba talking with Diddy's arms on Cuba's. In the next pic, Cuba has his arm around Lil Rod and is smirking. Court docs go on to state, quote, Cuba Gooding Jr. began touching, groping, and fondling Mr. Jones's legs, his inner thighs near his groin, the small of his back near his buttocks, and his shoulders. And talking about other people who were listed, Cuba Gooding Jr., you spoke about previous allegations with him. Is it possible that he could face additional charges based on the fact that Diddy allegedly has recordings of these instances?
You speak about the recordings, and that's probably going to be one of the most salacious, but also one of the most significant aspects of this case, because those recordings can literally be a window into what was going on in P. Diddy's home or wherever it was that these videos were shot, in terms of any potential allegations, whether it be drugs, guns, money laundering, sexual assaults, any of those. And so I think that's going to be something that we're all going to be talking about and waiting for. And Cuba Gooding Jr. is one of others that potentially could get themselves in trouble if there is evidence that supports criminal acts regarding him as well.
Back in 2019, Cuba was booked on misdemeanor charges of forcible touching and sexual abuse after allegedly groping a woman in Times Square. By the next year, 3 women had come forward accusing him of non-consensual sexual touching. He eventually reached a deal with prosecutors that required 6 months of counseling but no jail time. So far, we haven't heard a comment from Cuba about these specific allegations. Then there's some additional associates of Diddy listed in the lawsuit, but not named as defendants. That's people like Stevie J, Moy Bond, Frankie Santella, and Brendan Paul. Paul was arrested at the Miami airport last week while trying to board Diddy's plane. He's since been released on bail, but faces controlled substance charges. His attorney, Brian Bieber, sent us a statement after Paul's arrest. It reads, quote, "We do not plan on trying this case in the media. All issues will be dealt with in court." Paul is listed in the lawsuit as Diddy's alleged drug mule. Along with Frankie Santella and Moy Bond, Paul is listed as one of Christina Corum's direct reports.
I think many people that saw Brendan Paul get arrested assumed that his arrest is just one step towards him potentially providing information in regards to P. Diddy and any individual that is involved in this potential case. And so I think it's no coincidence that he was arrested at the time he was, just shortly after the raids on both of the homes. So I think we're going to be hearing much more about Brendan Paul in the future.
Another defendant who makes an appearance in Lil Rod's lawsuit is Justin Combs. Also, a defendant listed in that specific civil suit is Diddy's son, Justin Combs. He's 29 years old. Apparently, he also facilitated this sex trafficking empire, if that's what you want to call it. What would things look like moving forward for Justin? Is it possible down the line he may have to testify against his father? How could all of that work?
Yes. Is it possible that Justin will be called to testify against his father and any one of those individuals? Certainly. It's also possible he'll be named as a defendant in a potential criminal case. And so what the civil case gives you kind of a preview of what may Remember, this is civil, and these are claims by one individual. But those claims seem, if true, to have other witnesses that may be able to support and corroborate what this individual is saying. And if they do, that's going to be another way to get it to a potential federal criminal case.
After the lawsuit was filed, Justin Combs' rep made a statement reading, quote, Justin Combs categorically denies these absurd allegations. They are all lies. This is a clear example of a desperate person taking desperate measures in hope of a payday. There will be legal consequences for all defamatory statements made about the Combs family. Then there's the matter of major companies listed as defendants, including Love Records, Motown Records, and Universal Music Group. I'm also wondering about additional defendants that are record labels or studios. How does that work if they're listed in a civil suit like this?
So remember, right now, again, those are civil defendants. Can a corporation or company also become a criminal defendant? They can. It's a little more difficult to take that step in a case like this. So I think right now, I would expect that the agents in the U.S. Attorney's Office are more focused on the individuals and not on the actual companies, music labels, and corporations.
The attorney for Grange and Universal Music Group released a statement pointed at Lil Rod's attorney. It reads, quote, Mr. Blackburn, plaintiff's lawyer, has misused that license to self-promote, gratuitously, falsely, and recklessly accusing the UMG defendants of criminal behavior. So we've talked about the defendants in Lil Rod's lawsuit and the people whose names were just listed, but what about those whose names weren't listed? That's people like the, quote, Philadelphia rapper who dated Nicki Minaj, and Grammy Award-winning R&B singer who had trouble with law enforcement after assaulting a Bajan millionaire. Some speculate Lil Rod's referring to Meek Mill and Chris Brown there. In Lil Rod's lawsuit, there are several people who are listed defendants and other people who are just listed throughout the suit. But what about people who aren't listed, but they're just inferred to be part of it? Could they be in trouble coming up?
It's interesting because we're all playing guessing games when we look at the civil lawsuit, because we see that there's certain individuals who aren't named but are inferred. And one example is he names a Philly rapper who dated Nicki Minaj, and anyone who's familiar is guessing that he's talking about Meek Mill. There's a reference to another individual that, again, we're guessing that he's referring to Chris Brown. And so they're not named, but they're inferred within the complaint. And the question is, well, could they be facing potential charges? Anybody named, anybody who has anything to do with P. Diddy that was at any of these parties, that was in any way associated, could potentially be a witness or a suspect in this case. And I think it's up to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the feds to make a delineation between who the witnesses are, who potential cooperators are, and who the main focus of their eventual criminal investigation is going to be.
Then there's the matter of John and Jane Doe's 1 through 10, listed in Lil Rod's lawsuit and multiple others.
So there are many times, and I think we've spoken about this in the past, that individuals will be listed without their actual names. There's several reasons for it. Sometimes if the individual is underage, they won't have their names listed. If they were underage at the time that the actual events took place, they will not include their name. It doesn't mean we won't necessarily find out who they are, but it is not unusual to see John Doe 1 through 10 or more listed, whether it be on a civil suit or also in a criminal allegation.
So there are at least 5 civil suits that are against Diddy right now. In your opinion, is the Lil Rod the one the most damaging to Diddy?
So it's a great question. The reason that his civil suit stands out above the rest is a couple reasons. One is because it's quite recent. And so it's potentially easier for there to be corroboration of what happened. It's much harder to get corroboration when you're talking about a crime that allegedly happened 20 something years ago. The other thing that's so significant about his civil lawsuit is that it refers to video surveillance. It refers to video that he has in his possession that he says corroborates and supports the allegations against P. Diddy and all the other individuals that are claimed that are named in the civil suit. So that is much more troubling potentially for P. Diddy than older complaints, naturally.
Moving forward, Julie says it's a near certainty that Diddy faces criminal charges. What does the trajectory look like going forward for Diddy? Again, no charges yet, but let's say he is charged and has these federal charges against him. What would all of that look like?
So, it's anyone's guessing game in terms of when we would potentially see criminal charges. One would expect that if there is going to be criminal charges, his attorney will be informed because they're going to arrange for a date for him to turn himself in. They're going to discuss a potential bail package for him and any of the other individuals. And I think it's going to be a fairly long timeline. Remember, we're talking about the fact that they just raided the homes. They're going to want to dot their I's, cross their T's. I'm sure there's plenty of other witnesses that they need to speak to, potentially other information that they need to subpoena. And then we are so far off from seeing an indictment, but in the months to come, that may very well change.
And if we do get to that point with an indictment, just based on what you've heard from the civil lawsuits and all of the allegations, what do you think the charges against Diddy would be?
I think we're talking about some type of conspiracy, some type of potential that there could be some type of RICO, sex trafficking. Again, it's so early on. We know guns were recovered from, allegedly recovered from his home. The question is, were they legal? Were they illegal? I mean, every piece of this has questions along the way. And so we're all spending a lot of time guessing as to what we think may happen. But at the same time, the feds don't go into your home without more than just a little smoke. They are clearly looking for things that they know to be there. And it's my belief, and I think it's most attorneys' belief that are watching this, that we are headed towards criminal charges for Sean Puffy P. Diddy Combs.
As for Diddy himself, over the weekend, he posted on social media for the first time in recent weeks with a carousel of Easter pictures of his daughter. The caption reads, quote, "Happy Easter from Baby Love," with a pink heart. The comments were shut off for this post. In regards to Lil Rod's lawsuit, Diddy's attorney Sean Hawley says, quote, "His reckless name dropping about events that are pure fiction and simply did not happen is nothing more than a transparent attempt to garner headlines. We have overwhelming, indisputable proof that his claims are complete lies. Our attempts to share this proof with Mr. Jones's attorney, Tyrone Blackburn, have been ignored, as Mr. Blackburn refuses to return our calls. We will address these outlandish allegations in court and take all appropriate action against those who make them." In response to the raids of Diddy's home, his attorney released a statement last Tuesday, reading, quote, "Yesterday, there was a gross overuse of military-level force as search warrants were executed at Mr. Combs' residences. There's no excuse for the excessive show of force and hostility exhibited by authorities or the way his children and employees were treated." We've reached out to Lil Rod about his lawsuit and the other women who filed suit against Diddy. So far, we haven't heard back. Reporting for Long Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.